usable dApp, and how can we onboard, engage normal users? Because today, as you can see, we're kind of at a sad state of adoption. And this was a chart taken from the State of the dApps Ecosystem, Technology, and Adoption report by Fluence Network. And this shouldn't surprise anyone in this room. So most dApps have less than 10 active users. And I think that, honestly, these numbers are probably a little inflated. Although they did say when they were doing the report that they weren't looking at smart contract interactions. They were actually asking dApp developers directly, because some of these dApps include off-chain interactions, and so they didn't want to just take contract method calls. And so really we're at a state today where there's a lot of hype and still very little use, many, many years into the network, and so we still have a long way to go. And so basically, we haven't found what our value propositions need to be yet beyond decentralization. So as Taylor has hinted here before, that decentralization is actually not the value proposition. I mean, there are things like sound money. There are things like, not needing to trust your providers, but to end users and normal people, they don't really care about decentralization. And so what this means is that we've built systems that make it that are hard to use. And so we really haven't found a way to onboard beyond the crypto dev and the trader. And so those are basically people that are really incentivized to use this stuff because they can profit financially from it, because they're interested in it and they build with it and they're trying to solve some of these problems too. And so we haven't actually moved towards end users. We're still kind of at this hybrid dev user state. And so what we've seen too are that there are pockets of usable things emerging, like dev tools and some design rules, but they're still pretty fragmented and we haven't really seen them brought together in a meaningful way yet. And so these are just some of the things that we've heard building dApps and talking to users for a while. So some of the problems: onboarding, like MetaMask, don't seeds make plants, why a new browser? Like, these are just basic questions for people trying to use your thing. So like, if you can even communicate a value prop enough for them to try to sign into your app, they probably still can't. Token exposure. So like, beyond the state of not really understanding what they mean, people get mad when they go down, and that's just the reality of these things. And so also complexity. Most onboarding to dApps or in general require you to read pages of onboarding things or the about page to actually figure out how I can use this. Like, what is a CDP? Like, I really don't get this. Also, antisocial. So we've basically built our dApps on hex addresses and not like actual human readable profiles. And so normal humans actually have no way to interpret what your UI is trying to tell them. There's no way that they actually know which of these addresses are their friends or not, and it actually frightens people. Finality. So there's no back button. Most transactions go to the blockchain, and so we can't undo them, which makes people really anxious. Cost. So yeah, it shouldn't cost money to use dApps. As like people were saying, it's so hard that they should be paying me to use it. This doesn't feel right. Wait times, mining, seriously, how long until it's done? And fragmentation. So where'd this info go for my last app? I thought I already made a profile. What's going on? So in general, yeah, math too hard, gonna live my life, and moving on. So sorry, my emoji didn't load. But so we could talk dev tools and design patterns for how we can start to address some of these issues. And why dev tools? Because these are the people making the dApps. We've heard a lot of like usability approaches. A lot of approaches to usability have come at the application level, but that doesn't actually solve some of the core problems, because the fact of the matter is that we're still so early in the development of the ecosystem. Usability is emerging from the patterns and protocols that we're building on. And unfortunately with cryptography, you can't undo things. And so crypto system design is actually at the core of some of this stuff. And so there's a lot of info on this slide. But I'll just go through some rules and tools that we can use to try to make things more usable. And so, as a general rule, move off-chain whatever you can. So data and interactions that don't require global state, the approach is minimum viable blockchain. So we should be looking for other places to store this data that's not on-chain if it's not critical, and in most cases, if it isn't like a financial transaction. Remove tokens when possible. These just add friction to your app and don't do anything for usability. and don't block someone from using your app. So we've seen apps now where you can load the UI in a Web 2 browser, and then later if you connect an Aetherium account, it unlocks more critical functionality. It's a great pattern, and we're seeing things push even further in that direction. Make things work together. Don't try to reinvent the wheel and don't silo users in your app. Look at the rest of the ecosystem and the other tools that people are using and try to make them work. Don't build for robots or computers. Actually think about the end user and surface information that is relevant to them and that they're used to. Make these experiences feel more familiar, because in general, Web3 just feels foreign. And so along with that, use Web 2 patterns when possible and create something people actually want or need. And on the right, there's some tools that have been emerging over the last year, 2 years, that make some of these things possible. So stable tokens. People get mad when the value of the token that they bought just went down. So if you need to use tokens, use a stable coin. Keyless onboarding. So if you need to let users use your app for a pretty non-critical transaction that does need to go to the blockchain, try to use things like ephemeral keys, like Burner Wallet has gotten a lot of traction here this last few weeks. And Web 2 browsers, so things like Opera that are building crypto functionality directly into it. So I don't need to decide whether I'm going to a separate Web 3 browser to use a dApp or a Web 2 browser to do X or Y. Like, it should just work the same. Social profiles and data storage. So you should make your app feel social and familiar and human. And so you need a place to store this profile data. And that's what we'll get into a little bit more, as we've been working on 3Box for some of that. Gasless transactions. Yeah, if you need users to do transactions, you shouldn't make them pay. And they shouldn't have to worry about onboarding and buying tokens and acquiring Ether just to use your app. Layer 2 transaction cost and speed, so wait times, mining. Non-critical transactions, again, that don't need the main chain and can be relayed in later. Side chains and state channels are a great option. And lastly, your apps and wallets should all connect in a seamless way. And so things like Wallet Connect are great for that. So now, the second half of the presentation, we'll talk more about 3Box, what we've been working on. And really what we've been building is a social profiles and distributed data network. There are really 3 tools that we build that you can use in your dApp today that are working in production that'll help solve some of this familiarity problem. So we have an API, a profile hover, and a profiles app. And we'll go into what each of those are, and we'll give a quick demo on them. So our API lets you access and interact with a personal database for every Ethereum user. So the data that you might be storing on chain today, such as IPFS hashes of metadata or blobs of other data on IPFS that you store to the chain that probably don't need global state, you can save users a lot of hassle and interaction by just storing them in 3Box. And so what you can do once data is stored off-chain in this distributed network, you can onboard user profiles with this data by calling getProfile and others. You can set and get off-chain user data, which is basically enabling your app to actually store data in there as well, not just read their profile. You can also have specific spaces for your app. So if you don't want other apps to just easily be able to access the data you're storing in this network, you can kind of sandbox your app's data within the user's database that they still control, but that is not stored on-chain, on a server, or in local storage. So 3Box.js really provides your app with a 4th storage option. And we support encryption, which doesn't come out of the box with Web3 wallets today. So now I'll let Oed do the technical demo.
Cool. Cool. So we're gonna start with looking on how you get profile data from an Ethereum address. So ideally, this should be very simple, and you have to integrate it into your web application. But right now I'm just gonna use the Chromium console to show you how it works. So I'm gonna start with just getting the Ethereum address from the Web3 provider, and then giving that to the getProfile API in 3Box. So I also have 3Box imported into this console. So I have just prepared here, getting my address from Ethereum.enable. So I should have setup with the mic is kind of uncomfortable. All right, so there's my address. Now I will use the get profile API. So I put, sorry? Oh, sorry, yeah. Is that good? Cool. All right, so this function returns a promise, so I'm just going to log that. Huh. Seems like I'm disconnected from the Wi-Fi. Let's try this again. Right, so now I get a profile object, and this is just regular JavaScript object containing all of the data in my profile. So if you want to do something more useful with this, we might want to just store this profile temporarily. And one cool thing we can do now is I have some verifications in my profile. So I can basically use another API called get verified accounts. And that will verify my proofs in my profile. So let's see, I saved it as my profile. So here you can see my GitHub verification and my Twitter verification. So I have the username, and then I have like a proof that proves that. But the get verified accounts function automatically verifies your proofs. So you don't, like, if you use that function, you don't need to worry about like verifying it again. Right. So this is like the basic functionality of like viewing user's profile. But if we want to do something more interesting where we save data, we need to open the box for the users. So basically, it's fairly simple. You just do box dot open box. We pass in my address, and then we have to pass in the Ethereum provider. Then we need to like assign, let's see. Since this returns a promise, which returns an object, which we're just going to call box. So now we have a box object, and to view the profile, same as before, the same profile as before, because now I'm logged into my 3Box account that's associated with my Ethereum address. So now I'm just going to do public dot all, and now I get the same profile as before, but I can also set data. So I set my name and set that to OED. Right, so this also returns a promise, but now we can also view the name if we call get, and then we're just gonna log that. So there's like the basic functionality of like how you set and get data in the public profile, and the same thing, basically the same API, but instead of public we type private. We'll store data, so we set let's set an email, and let's just do OED at 3Box. So this will set my email address, but this won't be public. So it's stored in your 3Box profile, but it's encrypted. So only it will only be viewable to apps that you authorize to see the information. Right. So and same thing here. We can call email dot or 3Box .private.get and then email, and I get back the result. So a new feature that we introduced recently is called spaces. So the thing with 3Box, when you just use it as I showed you, is that every dApp will get access to the same kind of namespace if dApp1 writes something in the box in the public store, let's say, another dApp could open the same box and then just remove that data, which is not desirable for the first app because they might be like relying on that data. So instead we introduced a feature called spaces, where we can basically give apps authorization to view a specific space where data is stored and encrypted only to that app. So I'm going to show you like an example of how to open a space. So we're going to do box.openspace, and then just I'm going to do buff hack. That's the name of the space. Then we get back a space. I'm just going to call it S, and I'm just going to call it buff space equals S. And now I get a request to sign. This basically is me giving consent through MetaMask that this app that I'm interacting with is allowed to access this space. So you can see the message is allow this app to open your buff hack space. I sign that, and now I have this thing. So I have a new object called buff space, and in this I also have the same API as the general box. So public.set, and let's call it favorite hack, and we're just going to do something called we-meme. Right, so now I set that, and exactly as before, we'll just do get, and we get the result. The cool thing about this is that this will only be editable by apps that you have authorized to edit the buff hack space. And in the same way, we can do private data. So private set secret. Cool. Yeah, and now we can also get that. And that's basically it. So to summarize, we have a public and private store that has like a general namespace that all dApps can access, and this is associated with your Ethereum address. And then you can also request the user that you want to access a space, and a space is basically a namespaced section of the user's 3Box storage, and only dApps that have like been given explicit permission to access that can edit and also read the private information. All right, so that's it for like the code demo. Do you want to go along with visual demos, Michael?
You can jump to hover.
Hover. Cool. So we also have a new feature or a new kind of product called Profile Hover. And basically we figured that calling, like we did up here with get profile, my address, and doing that yourself for your app is kind of a lot of work. So we wanted to make that more simply to like give you a way to display profiles. So we created something called Profile Hover. And it's basically just a small piece of code that you input into your dApp, like a HTML tag, and that would automatically convert Ethereum addresses to add a picture and a name, and you can hover it to view like additional information such as verified Twitter and GitHub. Do we have a demo somewhere?
It's on the repo.
On the what?
No, it's just on the repo file. If you go to the README.
Okay. So in here.
Just go to GitHub. /3box /profile hover profile dash hover.
Cool. So basically here we have a GIF that kind of shows you how it works. So you get an Ethereum address and then an image, and then if someone hovers, you see some additional information. And basically the way you import this into your dApp is that you first import a script tag with the profile hover script. Then everywhere you have an address and you want to show that in your UI, you can just do this special HTML tag that's 3box address and then the Ethereum address. Then you can also play around with different options and it will display kind of the hover in different ways. All right.
We'll do the final one.
Yeah.
All right, and for the last part of the demo, we'll just quickly show our application, which is a web app where users can manage their 3box profile. It's not a requirement that users use the Profiles app because any app can instantiate a 3box for a user if they don't have one by using 3Box.js and calling OpenBox. But the Profiles app is where users can actually see their data and manage it. And so you can do things also like verify your social accounts, like Oed mentioned, Twitter and GitHub, and share your profile with others. And it doesn't require them to have a Web3 browser. You can just copy your URL and paste it to them, and they can open it in whatever browser they have, view your public profile.